So we'll be looking at an introduction to the spectrophotometer. So this is your basic spectrophotometer. So we're going to look at the parts of the spectrophotometer first. Then after we're done, I'll show you how you can get your measurements. So first we begin by turning it on. At the back end here, there's a power button which you turn on. So once you turn on your spectrophotometer, you have your sample compartment here where you can open and close this lid. And inside we have cells. So in these cells, this is where you'll be putting your samples that you'll be reading the absorbance for. So we also have this knob here, which we use to remove the cells, because this is a single beam spectrophotometer. So light can only pass from through one cuvette at a time. So this is where the light passes into your cuvette to the other end, and then it gets your reading for your absorbance or the transmittance. Okay, so we also have this knob here, which just is the wavelength adjustment knob. So you can adjust the wavelength according to the wavelength that you are required to use for your sample. So this is where you do the adjustment from using this knob. Then aside from that, we have this LED panel here where you'll be able to read your absorbance, or if you want to read the transmittance, you can press the mode button here and then it will give you the transmittance. So you also have a provision to print, and here you can adjust your transmitters as well as you are trying to set your so for now we're going to start. I'll show you how you can get your measurements. So this is the cuvette that we use to put our samples in to be able to read the absorbance for different samples. So if you notice, this cuvette has a frosted end and a clear side, a frosted side and a clear side. So the frosted end is this side and the clear side is here, and on the clear side you can see the triangle at the top there. So this is where you should face your cuvette in the cell. Okay, so you put the clear side where light will be able to pass through, and the frosted end should face towards you. Okay, so this is how you're going to get your reading for the transmittance. Okay, so for every reading, before you begin your readings for different samples, you need a blank. So a blank is basically a clear liquid which doesn't contain the sample that you're trying to determine the absorbance for. So this is your blank, which is clear, and make sure you label your cuvettes on the frosted end and not on the clear end. Okay, so every time you're about to get a reading, make sure you clear the sides of the cuvette so that you don't have any fluids outside of it. So if you notice this droplet here, it's inside my cuvette, so I have nothing to worry about. So I can go ahead and put this inside my cell so that I can blank the spectrophotometer. So I'll put this right here. So remember, the triangle side is this side where it's clear, so that's where my cuvette has been positioned. And then I'm going to close the compartment lid. And then here I'll measure at the wavelength of 460. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I adjust my transmittance to 100. Okay, so once you have your transmittance at 100, then you can start getting your measurements. Okay, so if my transmittance doesn't go back down to 100, I can equally adjust the wavelength a little bit. So you notice I've adjusted the wavelength to 450, and this is the transmittance it's giving me. So because I want the transmittance to be 100, I'll continue adjusting my wavelength until I get my transmitters at 100. Okay, and finally, when I have my transmittance at 100, I can begin reading my other samples. Okay. So here I've managed to adjust the wavelength and I have a transmittance of 100. Okay, So there we go, we can see the transmittance is at 100. So now I can begin to put in my other samples into the different cells. So I can remove my blank and put in my second sample, which is sample 2. Remember what I said? Make sure you label your cuvettes on the frosted end and not on the clear end. And then my cuvette goes in like that, and then it gives me my transmittance at 44%. Okay, so if you want to read the absorbance, you can simply click the mode button here. Once you click the mode button, it will give you this. This would be my absorbance. So this is 0.357. And then this would be my transmittance. And this would be the concentration. And this would be the factor for my sample. So taking note of the absorbance for this sample, I can take it out and take my final reading for the next sample. Now please take note that these measurements are being done at the same wavelength. So there I have my absorbance. So if I need to check what the transmittance is, that would be my transmittance. Okay, so please also take note of the difference between absorbance and transmittance, so do not confuse the two. Okay, so if you're done and now you want to run a different set of sample at a different wavelength, again, you adjust the wavelength and then you're going to put in your blank. Make sure when you put in your blank, you have your transmittance at 100, and then afterwards you can begin getting your readings for the other samples. So that's basically how you use the spectrophotometer. So with this, you can now draw up your graph and you can determine concentrations of unknown samples. Okay, so this is the site where we'll be conducting our experiment from. So we have our virtual spectrophotometer here, and then we have our cuvettes. So we have our blank, our unknown, and our known. And then this is the concentration that we'll be using, which is 0.001 molar. So it also gives you the provision to adjust the concentrations here. However, this will maintain this concentration. And the solution we'll be using is cobalt 2 chloride. So once you have taken your measurements for the absorbance, you can calculate your concentration and put it in there. Once you've slot your concentration in there, you can submit and it will give you the answer as to whether it's correct or not. And you're going to record that answer in your lab report. So this panel here, this is where you'll be able to see the wavelength, and you can adjust the wavelength from these two knobs, two buttons here, this one and this one. So you can reduce it or you can increase it like that. Okay, so we will start by zeroing our spectrophotometer. How are we going to do that? We're going to place the blank in. So we'll click on the lid to open the lid of the spectrophotometer. Click on the blank, and our blank will be placed into the spectrophotometer cell there. Then we're going to click to close the spectrophotometer lid, and then we're going to place on ABS 100% T to zero the spectrophotometer, and then there we have our zero absorbance. Okay, so once we do that, we can now read our different samples at this wavelength, and when we're done, we can proceed to reading our samples at the different wavelengths that we've been provided with in our handout. So that's basically all that you'll be doing in today's practical. So make sure you record all your results and you give a full lab report at the end of the session. So all the best.